Welcome to Mental.Health.Merienda, your snack-sized guide to mental health wellness. I'm Dr. Adeline Leon, licensed clinical psychologist specializing in neuropsychology.
And I'm Michelle Young, licensed clinical social worker. For today's episode, we're going to do something a little different. We wanted to get into a lot of misused psychology terms. So there's a lot of terms in social media, on TikTok, on Instagram that you hear, like, for example, gaslighting or narcissism. So words like that, which tend to be everywhere in our culture. But what does it really mean, especially in the mental health world, especially in psychology? And we thought it would be helpful because I think it's important to just make sure, we're using words mindfully. We don't want to dilute someone's experience. So that's what we're going to do today. So the first term we're going to talk about is gaslighting. So gaslighting is probably one of the most misconstrued words over the past couple years that you'll hear a lot in social media. And it's often used to describe anything where it's insensitive or it's a lie or it's deceitfulness. But true gaslighting occurs when someone is manipulating you, making you question your reality, your sanity, your judgment, your experience. So that is what gaslighting is supposed to be. Gaslighting often happens in abusive relationships where one partner is making the other person question their judgment, question their reality. In addition to being dishonest, they're also kind of flipping the script back on their partner, saying, well, actually, it's all in your head. Actually, you're the one who's insecure, or everyone knows that you're hysterical. It's flipping the script. And then another key thing with gaslighting is that it happens in close relationships where there is supposed to be trust. That's why it's so easy to gaslight someone that you're in a romantic relationship with, because you're supposed to trust, your romantic partner. And then they're using that to manipulate you, to take advantage of you. And the intent of gaslighting is to cause confusion. It's to sow those seeds of doubt in the other person.
Yeah, I think that's what can make it so harmful is that it comes from a person, like you said, Michelle, that you really trust. And so it can make it so that you take that person's trust and you twist it and you use it against them to manipulate them. And so, oh no, you didn't see that. That wasn't me. Well, you saw, and then the person trusts you so much that like, oh, I guess it wasn't him. It probably is just in my head. It must just be me. Maybe there's something wrong with me. You start to really question yourself. It can be so harmful to your self-image too.
Definitely. And I think too, another key thing with gaslighting versus just general dishonesty is that it happens over time. So it's not just one time where they say, oh, no, it's all in your head. It's like over and over again over over the relationship, over a course of time. And so you do, as the person who's being gaslit, start to question yourself, like, is it all in my head? Is it me? I guess it's me, but it also doesn't feel right. So it's very confusing and very harmful and really, it's a form of abuse. It's a form of emotional abuse for sure. So another term that often gets misused is the term toxic. So when you hear the word toxic, sometimes people tend to attach toxic to anything that's upsetting or anything that's annoying to them. So you had to wait an extra, 10 minutes because someone messed up your order. Like, oh, that person was toxic, or this restaurant was toxic, or something like that. And that's not toxic.
Not
That's not
toxic.
At least, that's not what the same meaning.
Yeah.
So
Annoying, but yeah.
Yeah, annoying, like, inconvenient, but not toxic. So when we talk about what's toxic, typically people and relationships that are toxic, and people and relationships who you would label as toxic would be ones that are emotionally and physically harmful to yourself, even like really draining emotionally. So kind of think like there is like some sort of like psychological like effect of this toxicity of either a toxic person or a toxic relationship. And the term was actually first used by someone named Lillian Glass in her 1995 book called Toxic People. And it was used to indicate a relationship that was built on conflict, competition, the need for one person to control another. So again, when you hear the origins of toxic, it was really meant when you kind of think about toxic people or toxic relationship, there is this layer of emotional and psychological abuse. So signs of a toxic relationship. So relationships can be toxic, as I said earlier. But some key signs of a truly toxic relationship would be it's insidious. So toxic people don't show their negative side right away. It kind of comes in slowly, little by little, and then more pronounced like towards the end when there is more trust in the relationship.
Yeah, like it kind of creeps in.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm.
And then another sign is that, for toxic relationships to happen, it usually takes a long time for it to evolve. Because again, what we're saying, it's insidious. So you start to notice that like, oh, wow, this is truly a toxic relationship, like years, even months kind of down the road after experiencing time with that toxic person over a long period of time. And toxic people often at first seem really charismatic, really charming. And then, you kind of see their true colors as you spend more time with them, as you get to know them. And then their true colors being that they're controlling, they're demanding, they're emotionally abusive to their partner. Emotionally abusive tactics such as gaslighting often happens in these types of relationships. And if you are somebody where, there is someone toxic in your life, it feels like it is something that is emotionally draining, emotionally damaging to you. And that person, if you're feeling that way, isn't a good match. And that's just something that you should definitely look into if you happen to be in a relationship where you think it's truly toxic. Again, we're talking about emotional abuse. You're feeling emotionally drained. Maybe you're questioning, your own reality, your own judgment because you're being gaslit by this, toxic person. That is something to look out for and to really take a step back and see if this is a relationship that you should keep.
I think that's definitely one that's misused a lot. That's way more serious than what people say, and a lot of times on social media, especially. So another term that we tend to see misused is traumatized. And so I do want to say, I think sometimes people might say like, "Oh, that was traumatizing," and they're kind of using it a little bit as a like colloquially, so kind of like a joke a bit. And so it's still not great to do that because it really does dilute and demean the experience of people who really do experience trauma. But there's a big difference between trauma and like feeling traumatized and feeling embarrassed. And I think that's a lot of what people are really referring to when they say that was traumatizing. So, let's say I was doing a presentation and I completely forgot what I was supposed to say mid sentence, or my PowerPoint just stopped working and the whole presentation just went like just off the rails. That would be embarrassing, but it wouldn't
Totally
be
embarrassing.
traumatizing. Yeah, it
Yeah.
would be embarrassing. Yeah. If you fall in front of people, that's embarrassing. It's not traumatizing. When we think about trauma, it's often chronic. It's a physiological disruption of the nervous system, and it's an emotional response to a terrible event like an accident, a rape, a natural disaster, war. We think about veterans, and a lot of them have post traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. So it's either being exposed to a situation where there was an imminent risk of harm where you could have died, or even witnessing something like that, or even hearing about it sometimes. We've done an episode way back. You should definitely check it out if you haven't already, about media stress and how there could definitely, you could have some situations like that, like reading about shootings and unfortunately a lot that we see in the media. But with post-traumatic stress disorder, with PTSD, you experience this intense distress that makes them feel like they are reliving the experience. So if you think about, if you've heard of reliving, and again going back to like veterans, like combat veterans
Like
and
shell shock.
flashbacks.
Like shell shock,
Shell
they call
shock,
it.
yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. So that's what we're talking about. When we hear the word traumatized, just used in this very casual sense, it really does, like I said earlier, it just really does trivialize the experience of people with PTSD, which is very, very difficult to live with, and a very, very serious disorder.
Yeah, no, I think that's something to keep in mind. I think the point is that we want to just be mindful with our language because you don't want to trivialize, people's experiences who had, truly awful things that they're trying to cope with. So, yeah. Yeah. Related to traumatize, another word that I think often gets misused is the word triggered. So you might hear that word often, triggered. I think it gets misused to feeling like maybe if you're offended, like, oh, that triggered me, like I was offended. And being triggered and being offended are definitely two different things. A recent search on Reddit revealed that people were triggered by, a celebrity's red carpet dress, for example. And that's, not
How is
necessarily
that triggered?
I don't know.
Okay. Maybe you don't like it, but triggered? It's okay.
Yeah. Like they were shocked by it. And so it's triggered. Yeah. So again, just kind of how silly that was, right? So triggered and just being offended or being shocked are totally two different things. So in its truest form, being triggered means that you're encountering a reminder of a traumatic experience. So kind of related to, what Adeline was saying about the word traumatized and experiencing trauma. Sometimes when you're talking about being triggered, it might also be associated with remembering having flashbacks of the traumatic incident, having like really harmful thoughts, even like having a panic attack at its most extreme form. So triggered and trauma are pretty much related in terms of, being really mindful of its usage. But for triggered, like think again, as you mentioned earlier, Adeline, with that example of post-traumatic stress, like you think of people who experienced, war, were exposed to war, the truest form of triggered might be that they, like, let's say they heard a loud sound. It took them back to maybe hearing gunshots or hearing bombs and then being scared that, they were going to not live or people around them were not going to live, and then taking them back to that experience. So that's kind of like what triggered is supposed to mean. It kind of is re-traumatizing you. It's taking you back to remembering a very traumatizing time.
Yeah, like 4th of July can be very difficult
Yeah.
for war veterans because, even though it's not gunshots, the
The
fireworks
loud
can,
sounds. Yeah.
yeah, the loud sound. So that is really, if a war veteran with PTSD is triggered by 4th of July fireworks, that is actually the true kind of definition of triggered, where it's kind of bringing you back to that traumatic experience.
Yeah. And oftentimes when you watch like certain television shows or movies, there might be trigger warnings. And I think sometimes people like don't take those very seriously. But the reason for those is that, certain TV shows that, that maybe they depict war, like we were talking about, war as an example or being a veteran as an example, maybe seeing those images might have, cause flashbacks for people who have PTSD, or maybe someone who's recovering from like substance use. They might see something on TV where it's, very realistic portrayal of substance use, or, people using drugs, and that could also kind of take them back to a traumatic event. And so those trigger warnings are actually for a purpose, to make sure people know before they watch a show going into it that, hey, there's going to be these images that might be disturbing to some. So, maybe some people shouldn't watch those things if they know they're going to be triggered, but it's definitely something to not take lightly.
So another term that is misused quite a bit is narcissist. I would say it's one of the internet's probably favorite terms right now, or it has been for some time. And to some extent, it's become a shorthand for referring to anyone who's maybe a little full of themselves or a bit arrogant and
Conceited.
conceited. Yeah, yeah. And if you haven't checked out, if you haven't looked at our video on narcissism and narcissists, definitely make sure to check that out, because we go into a little bit more detail about narcissist and what is and is not a narcissist. So definitely make sure to look at that. We can link that down below. But with narcissism, it's sometimes also even used to refer to anyone that has qualities that you don't like. A lot of times it's used to refer to an ex. So kind of in retrospect, when you're thinking back on a past relationship, like, oh, that ex was a narcissist, or maybe even your current partner sometimes. You might even want to call someone that you're no longer friends with, like a frenemy, or someone that you are friends with that you don't have a great relationship with. You might want to call them a narcissist, but definitely try to refrain from doing that, because with narcissistic personality disorder, these are some of the things that we mentioned in our other content about narcissism. But it has to be something that everybody notices, and so it's everyone notices these signs in this person, and involves us very specific characteristics like having fantasies of power and beauty and success, having an exaggerated sense of your talent and self-importance, so thinking that you should be rewarded for doing the very minor things, kind of feeling special, feeling like you should be in this elite special group, having a very, very deep set need for admiration and attention, having, in the more extreme forms, that does not always involve this, but in some of the more extreme forms, it can involve some manipulation and some kind of taking advantage of other people, and having just a lot of trouble with coping with criticism, because it kind of makes sense. If in your head you are kind of up here and that's a big part of your sense of self, it's hard to deal with any kind of criticism that might break down that view that you have of yourself, which is a very deep set view. That's the thing about personality disorders, is that they start off when you're in your early 20s or so, and they've been around for a long time, and you see them in all situations. Definitely not everyone is a narcissist. Really keep that in mind.
Yeah.
It's a big one.
Yeah. I think too, it's also important to remember, like, it's not just not with like ex-boyfriends or past lovers or even like romantic relationships, but people with truly who have narcissistic personality disorder. It could be like anyone in your that you have a relationship with. It could be like your parent. It could be like a family member, a friend, a teacher. You could have experienced like a teacher who was a narcissist. But again, as Adeline said, it's pervasive. It's everyone in that person's life notices that they have these characteristics that are very hard to deal with. Quite frankly, I think you can't miss it if you actually do come across a narcissist. And it's really low, the percentage of people who actually do have narcissistic personality disorder, in the US at least. So also something to keep in mind.
It's
It's not
it's up
as
to 5%. Yeah, it's not very much. Up to 5%.
too. Yeah. And a lot of narcissists maybe don't seek out treatment, or they seek out treatment for different purposes. But again, like not every ex-boyfriend, every ex-girlfriend is a narcissist. So that's also something to kind of weigh that not everyone you meet is a narcissist.
Yeah. And I think some people might be a bit more selfish in relationships. Maybe they haven't been in a lot of relationships before, or they're just not great at the level of compromise that's necessary to be in a healthy romantic relationship. So just because they seem a bit selfish in their romantic relationships, if they don't exhibit some of those characteristics that I mentioned a couple minutes ago with everybody in their life, then this is not someone who's a narcissist. They're probably just not great at relationships.
Big difference.
Yeah. And so the last term that we'll be going over that's often misused is love bombing. So with love bombing, if you have someone that you recently started dating, and then one of the big signs is that very early on they start giving you these very lavish gifts. In a way that seems just not necessarily nice. It seems like, oh, whoa, you just gave me a Rolex watch and I've met you once. So
Wow.
something very extreme.
That is extreme.
Yeah. I mean, just to give a really extreme example. And so with that, you have someone who is wanting to see you all the time, wanting to spend time with you all the time, wanting to give you these lavish gifts. It might start to even kind of worsen bit more and slowly transition into even a manipulation where, let's say you have plans with someone else and they might say, oh, well, but I really wanted to see you. Or I made dinner for you. I made your favorite dinner for you. Oh, I thought, we could see each other. That's really manipulative, to do something like that. Again, on the surface, it seems nice. Like, oh, he made dinner for me and he thought of my favorite meal. But when you really think about the boundaries that person is really crossing, and really trying to kind of bombard you with all of this kind of, well, again, love bombing. It's not really love, but with all this kind of affection and attention. And it's trying to make you almost kind of addicted to that attention and that love and affection from them, so that you keep going back to it. Again, it's another sense of control and manipulation.
Yeah. I think too, like all that inundation of like affection and attention also kind of like overwhelms your nervous system. So you're almost like, it's hard to say no, or it's hard to set boundaries, because like you're just like, oh my God, I'm so overwhelmed. And it seems nice on the surface, but as you're saying, Adeline, it's actually manipulative.
Yeah. So if you question whether you might be in a love bombing situation, we actually also did a video on love bombing. So definitely make sure to check that out in our shorts and also on TikTok. But one way to try to determine if you might be in this situation is to set a boundary with that person. So to use the example again of, you have plans with someone else and they made you dinner and they're kind of making you feel bad about it. If you set the boundary and say, hey, I really appreciate that, but I actually already made plans with my friend, and we're going to, we already have a plan. We already have tickets to a movie or whatever it might be. If it's a love bombing situation, they're more likely to respond in a really negative way and potentially kind of cut things off with you. If it's not a love bombing situation, maybe it's someone who just is really into you, which of course can happen. Of course, we would love for that to happen. But if it is that, then they're more likely to maybe be disappointed. Like, who wouldn't be? But to be okay. Well, yeah, I guess I should have checked with you before. Well, maybe I can save this dinner for tomorrow night. Are you free tomorrow night? Or maybe, what night are you free? So that's kind of a bit. It's good to set boundaries anyway, but that's a little bit of a way to kind of test and see if it might really be a love bombing situation. So definitely watch out for that one too.
Yeah, no, that's a good one. Just kind of like you set a boundary and see how they react, because how they react when you have to set a boundary tells you a lot about the person.
So that's all we have for today on kind of defining and clarifying some information about some misused psychology terms, because there's definitely a lot of them out there, and it can be really confusing. All this information on TikTok and other social media platforms. So we hope that we've cleared up some of it for you and made it a little clearer to see. But we'll definitely link some of our videos below. We have a video on relationship red flags, which is very much related to some of these topics that we've discussed today, and we have a separate video on narcissism. So we'll link those. Definitely make sure to check those out. But again, I'm Dr. Adeline Leon, licensed clinical psychologist.
And I'm Michelle Young, licensed clinical social worker. And don't forget, we would love to hear from you. So don't forget to comment below if these are terms that you've also heard, that you've also been confused by, or you kind of see people misusing it. We'd love to hear from you.
Thank you. We'll see you soon.
See you next week. Bye.